It's Friday, December 20, 2019, and this is the 5-Minute Podcast Review. Now, I got a bit of email reaction to the last episode where I looked at a couple of true crime podcasts, Breaking the Case and The Lighthouse. And as I said at the time, I don't really cover too many true crime podcasts, partly because it's just not my thing, especially when they tend towards the overly dramatic crime as entertainment sort of area. But the reaction did reinforce just how popular true crime has become as a podcast genre. Anyhow, a common theme in many of the responses, or many of the emails, may be triggered by the fact that The Lighthouse is an Australian podcast, was to point out that I didn't mention another big Australian true crime podcast called A Perfect Storm. Okay, so A Perfect Storm bills itself as telling, quote, for the first time, all the facts behind the death of Azaria Chamberlain, end quote. Azaria Chamberlain was, of course, the baby taken by a dingo at Ayers Rock, which is now known as Uluru and is in outback Australia. Her mother, Lindy Chamberlain, was found guilty of Azaria's murder and jailed, though years later the conviction was overturned. It'd have to be Australia's most well-known missing person story. In fact, a story known around the world, especially after it was made into a feature film starring Meryl Streep as Lindy Chamberlain. I haven't listened to A Perfect Storm yet, and I don't know if I will. As I said, true crime isn't really my thing, though from what I understand, the story is really about how the justice system fell victim to assumption and bias, and A Perfect Storm claims to have plenty of material that has never been exposed before, including recordings of police interviews. So maybe I'll give a few episodes a listen to over the Christmas break. In any case, there's a link to A Perfect Storm on your screen. Now, the next two podcasts, which I've been listening to lately, have a common theme of looking at situations where things went wrong and examining the reasons why. But the style of each podcast is very different. The first podcast is called Causality. It's produced by the Engineered Network and takes a systematic, engineering-oriented, facts-based look at the chain of events that led to a range of disasters. For example, the collapse of a hotel building in Singapore, a train crash in central Paris that killed 56, the fatal contamination of a town's water supply in Canada, and the cyber attack-based failure of the Ukrainian power grid. Now, I'll play you just a short sample which will give you a better idea of the tone of Causality than me trying to describe it.
Around this time, a construction project was underway that required the installation of 615 metres or 2,000 feet of replacement water mains on Highway Number 9 in southwest Walkerton between Wallace Street and Circle Drive. On Wednesday, the 17th of May at 9:14 a.m, the A&L laboratory faxed the results from the Highway 9 project water samples to the PUC. All three samples indicated positive for total coliforms and E. coli. At 2:37 p.m. that afternoon, the remaining tests from the A&L lab were faxed to the PUC, with a sample labelled Well 7 treated, positive for total coliform and E. coli. Further, the tests indicated coliform bacteria greater than 200 CFUs per 100 mils, E. coli greater than 200 CFUs per 100 mils, and a heterotrophic plate count of 600 CFUs per mil. By Thursday, the 18th of May, the number of...
All right, so as you could hear, Causality is very technical. And you could imagine Causality, which, as I said, is produced by the Engineered Network, is aimed only at engineers, but it definitely has a broader audience, being anyone interested in the technicalities of the chain of events, and it is almost always a chain of events that lead to disaster. Okay, so that's Causality. The second podcast is called Cautionary Tales, and it's kind of a similar idea, but embellished with all the production values and storytelling flourishes typical of a more mainstream podcast. Cautionary Tales is produced by Pushkin Industries, which is Malcolm Gladwell's new podcast production company. And although Malcolm Gladwell doesn't narrate, at least not any of the episodes I've heard so far, it's still very Malcolm Gladwell. And by that I mean a layer of what some would cynically call pop psychology theories, retrofitted to various disasters of the past, bringing to light what is usually the human behaviour that led to the disaster. Typically some character in a leadership role, blindly focused on a single goal and astonishingly blind to the unfolding disaster. But don't take what I'm saying the wrong way. I've actually enjoyed the episodes of Cautionary Tales that I've listened to so far. You could definitely call them rollicking yarns. And a great episode to start with is the November 29 episode called The Great Airship Race. And this is truly a rollicking yarn featuring a classically pompous British lord, seemingly more concerned about if a pioneering airship could carry his crates of champagne than if it was actually airworthy. And you can imagine how this particular cautionary tale ends. But it's a true story. I actually spent time after listening to the episode looking up the details, presented more soberly on Wikipedia and other online sites. This airship disaster occurred almost a decade before the Hindenburg disaster. And I always thought of airships as a German thing and didn't realise the history of British airships. And this particular incident, which was the incident to put an end to British airship development. Anyhow, there are currently 6 or 7 episodes of Cautionary Tales up, all on different subjects, and definitely worth checking out. But like I said, start with the airship episode. Righto, I think we are done. Quick reminder, we looked at firstly A Perfect Storm about the Azaria Chamberlain case, then Causality, and finally Cautionary Tales. As always, links for these podcasts are on your screen, and they do work as active links on pretty much all podcast players, except Spotify. But, of course, if you're on Spotify, just search the podcast name. Do I even need to explain this? I don't think so. Anyway, catch you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Crime as entertainment sort of area. But the reaction did reinforce just how popular true crime has become as a podcast genre. But the reaction did reinforce